The last time I saw a ward this quiet, everyone in it was dead. That was my first thought when Dr. Adam Scott led me into First Light Colony's primary medical facility. Not because the beds were empty, they were full. 23 patients according to the display board. Post-operative recoveries mostly. A few chronic pain management cases. One active chemotherapy infusion. All of them conscious, alert, and absolutely silent. "We call it the Clinic of Quiet Triumphs," Scott said, and I could hear the Hungarian lilt that softened his consonants. He walked with his hands behind his back, never once checking on the patients as we passed. "I imagine it's quite different from what you expected to find." Expected was too gentle a word. We'd prepared for catastrophe. 3 years since First Light's last coherent transmission, which had described failing atmospheric processes and some kind of respiratory plague they designated the Winter of Vents. The rescue mission briefing had used words like critical survival scenario and potential total colony loss. My emergency kit contained enough morphine to ease 200 deaths. Instead, I'd walked off the ship to find a functioning city with cleaner air than Earth. The docking officer who'd greeted us had perfect teeth and steady hands. She'd smiled while explaining that we'd need temporary stability tags to access any colonial infrastructure. Standard safety protocol, she'd assured us, like wearing sterile gloves for society. "Your medical metrics are remarkable," I said to Scott, because they were. The ward's display showed 0 pain scores across the board. Not low, 0. Even the chemotherapy patient registered nothing above baseline discomfort. "How are you managing symptomatic control?" "We've moved beyond management, Dr. Ellison. We've achieved resolution." A woman in the nearest bed turned her head to watch us. 60-something, surgical dressing on her abdomen that suggested recent bowel resection. Major surgery, probably cancer removal. She should have been grimacing, shifting to find a position that hurt less. Maybe clutching a patient-controlled analgesia button. Instead, she folded her hands over the blanket and smiled at me, with the kind of serene expression I'd only seen in late-stage hospice patients who'd made peace with dying. Except her vitals were perfect. "I'd like to examine your protocols," I said. "The mission parameters require a full medical audit before we can certify the colony's status." Scott stopped at a supply station and pulled out what looked like a standard medical bracelet, except the surface had an oily sheen. "Of course, but you'll need baseline access first. The stability tag integrates with our care systems, tracks vital signs, ensures sterile fields, prevents cross-contamination of biological or psychological vectors." "Psychological vectors?" "Distress is contagious, Dr. Ellison. Surely you've seen how one patient's anxiety can destabilize an entire ward. We maintain emotional homeostasis the same way we maintain atmospheric balance." He held out the bracelet. "It's temporary, completely reversible. You can remove it anytime you choose to leave our medical facilities." The bracelet was warm. That shouldn't have bothered me. Most medical monitors generate a little heat, but this felt different. Alive, almost. "There is one minor addition I'd recommend," Scott continued, pulling a second device from the station. This one was smaller, like a dermal patch. "Sleep optimization. Your ship's chronometer shows you've been running on Earth-standard days. This will help you adapt to our cycle without fatigue compromising your assessment. Think of it as medical-grade melatonin, but more sophisticated." My thumb found the scar on my left hand. An old nervous habit from my residency days, back when I'd believed medicine was about fixing people rather than easing their journey toward an ending. The mission needed this audit. My crew needed me functional and alert to assess whether this colony was safe or whether we were walking into something that just looked like salvation. "The adapter is necessary for the assessment?" I asked. "Not necessary, but you'll find it helpful. The colony runs on 26-hour days now, a quirk of the terraforming process. Without adaptation, you'll be fighting your circadian rhythm the entire time you're here." He paused, and his expression softened with what looked like genuine concern. I remember my first week after implementation. I resisted the adjustment aids and spent 6 days with a migraine that felt like my skull was trying to split down the middle. There's no valor in unnecessary suffering, Doctor. I'd written almost the same phrase in my notes after Naomi Graf died. The patient whose pain I'd ended, along with everything else. The one whose morphine drip I'd increased just a little too much because she'd begged me to make it stop. I took the patch. The application was simple. Press against the skin behind the ear. Wait for the brief thermal pulse that indicated activation. The bracelet clasped around my wrist. Both devices immediately synced with my vital signs, and I watched my readings populate on a nearby screen. Heart rate, blood oxygen, cortisol levels, even something called qualitative stability index that registered at 62%. "That will improve," Scott assured me, "once your sleep cycle normalizes. Now, would you like to observe morning rounds? I think you'll find our approach quite revolutionary." He led me deeper into the ward, past patients who tracked our movement without speaking, without even whispering to each other. The chemotherapy patient had closed her eyes, but her breathing was too even for real sleep, the mechanical rhythm of someone pretending. "Do they ever complain?" I asked. "About what?" Scott seemed genuinely puzzled. "Pain, discomfort, the food, the temperature, the waiting, anything." "No," he said, and the satisfaction in his voice twisted something in me I couldn't quite name. "They don't complain about anything at all." I thought about Peter Barter, our ship's engineer, who'd spent the entire descent complaining about the colony's docking protocol requiring us to accept automated guidance for the final approach. He'd called it letting someone else fly your ship, and made sure everyone knew he thought it was a terrible idea. His irritation had been oddly reassuring, proof that we were still ourselves, still capable of friction. Looking around this perfect ward with its perfect patients, I wondered when these people had last felt friction about anything. "Dr. Ellison," Scott said, stopping at a treatment room, "would you like to observe an intervention? We have a scheduled alignment in 10 minutes, a minor adjustment for one of our agricultural workers who's been experiencing some residual discomfort. Not treatment or procedure, alignment, like tuning an instrument until it played the right note." "Yes," I said, though my thumb was working that scar again, pressing hard enough to hurt. "I'd very much like to see that." Scott smiled. Not too wide, not too small, the exact expression you'd design if you were engineering reassurance. "Excellent. I think you'll find it quite educational. We've solved suffering, Dr. Ellison. Once you see how, you'll understand why we consider it our duty to share this gift." The alignment took 4 minutes and 37 seconds. I know because I counted every one of them. The patient was a young man, maybe 25, with dirt still under his fingernails from the agricultural domes. He'd come in complaining of shoulder pain, a rotator cuff strain from repetitive lifting, the kind of injury I'd treated hundreds of times with anti-inflammatories and physical therapy. Scott didn't touch him, not once. Instead, the patient lay on a treatment chair while a ring of small devices, they looked like speakers, arranged themselves around his head. Scott made minor adjustments on a console, watching readouts I couldn't quite see from my position. The patient's eyes stayed open the entire time, staring at a point on the ceiling while a low harmonic tone filled the room. Not quite music, not quite mechanical, something between the two. When it was over, the patient sat up, rotated his shoulder in a full circle and smiled. "Thank you, doctor. I feel much better." "How would you rate your pain now?" I asked before Scott could speak. "What pain?" The young man looked genuinely confused. "I feel perfect." After he left, Scott turned to me with an expression of professional pride. "We can discuss the technical specifications later, but essentially we're using targeted neural harmonics to recalibrate pain signal interpretation. The injury remains. We'll address that through conventional physiotherapy, but the suffering is gone." "I'd like to perform some standard assessments," I said. "For the audit, simple cognitive baselines, nothing invasive. Of course, choose any patient you like." I chose 3. The chemotherapy patient, a woman recovering from appendectomy, and an elderly man with diabetic neuropathy. For each, I ran what we called the binding lag test, a diagnostic I'd learned during my residency for detecting certain neurological conditions. The patient taps along with an irregular rhythm while describing how it feels to match the beat. Normal subjects show micro-delays as their conscious experience catches up with their motor functions. They'll say things like, "I'm slightly behind," or "I keep wanting to add an extra beat." All three patients matched my rhythm perfectly. More disturbing, when I asked them to describe the experience, they gave identical answers. "It feels correct." "Can you elaborate?" I asked the elderly man. "The rhythm is 7573. I match it. It feels correct." "Does it feel difficult, easy, natural?" He paused. "It feels correct." I was writing notes when Peter Barter's voice crackled through my communicator, a short-range radio we'd insisted on keeping as backup to the colony's systems. "Doc, need you back at the ship. Bring your meter." The entropy meter was a handheld device about the size of a medical scanner, designed to measure what we called cognitive variability, essentially the random neural firing that indicates conscious processing. I'd grabbed it from my kit before leaving the ship, more from habit than any expectation I'd need it. "Apologies," I told Scott. "Ship business. Can we continue this afternoon?" "Of course. Your stability tag will maintain access for 72 hours. He walked me to the exit, past those beds with their silent patients. "I hope your engineer isn't having difficulties with our systems. Some visitors find our infrastructure unintuitive." Peter was waiting in the ship's medical bay, along with our anthropologist, Simon Ortega. Peter had his shirt off, pressing a sensor to his chest, while staring at our environmental display. "Tell me you haven't been outside without the filters," I said. "I've been outside with the filters. Still want you to scan me." He grabbed the entropy meter from my hands, running it over his temple. The reading came back normal, high variability, the chaotic signature of an active consciousness. "Now scan yourself." I did. Also normal, though slightly suppressed from fatigue. "Good. Now listen to this." Peter pulled up an audio file on his tablet, recorded from his inspection of the colony's maintenance infrastructure. At first, I heard nothing unusual. The hum of ventilation, the distant clank of machinery. Then he isolated a frequency, and there it was. A sweet, almost musical undertone woven through the white noise of the air system. "It's in the HVAC," he said. "Whole colony's breathing it. Residential, commercial, even the bloody toilets." He pulled his shirt back on, and I noticed he'd been sweating despite the bay's cool temperature. "That shimmer you see when the light hits, that's not humidity. It's some kind of aerosol. Nanoscale, probably." Simon leaned forward. "The colonists don't seem aware of it." "Because they're marinating in it," Peter said. "Like fish not knowing they're in water, except this water's doing something to their heads." He pointed at my wrist. "You wearing their tech?" I looked at the stability tag bracelet. "It's temporary, required for access." "Required," Peter repeated. "Right, and that patch behind your ear?" "Sleep optimization. Helps with their 26-hour days." Peter and Simon exchanged glances. "What?" I asked. "Their days aren't 26 hours. Simon said quietly. "We checked the planetary rotation. It's 24. My communicator crackled again, but this time it wasn't one of our crew. The voice was female, accented. "Dr. Ellison, the real doctor from the ship." I looked at Peter, who shrugged. I keyed the response. "This is Ellison. Who is this?" "Please, maintenance tunnel under the clinic. Service hatch J7. Come alone. No recordings. I need..." Her voice broke into static, then came back. "I need you to hurt me." The transmission cut off. Peter was already pulling up a schematic of the colony's maintenance infrastructure. J7 is directly below where you just were. 2-meter crawl space. No surveillance according to these plans. He looked up at me. "Trap?" "Maybe." I pulled off the sleep optimization patch, feeling an immediate wave of fatigue that confirmed it had been doing something to my system. The stability tag would have to stay. I needed access. But someone who wants to be hurt doesn't sound like they're part of whatever's happening here. Or that's exactly what they'd want you to think, Simon said. I pocketed the entropy meter and a basic trauma kit. Only one way to find out. The maintenance tunnel was accessed through what looked like a storage closet in the clinic's lower level. The hatch was already open, leading to a ladder that descended into darkness. I could hear the colony's heartbeat down there, pumps and processors, and the endless circulation of that sweet, poisoned air. She was waiting at the bottom, thin, maybe 35, with the kind of pallor that came from too much time in artificial light. Her clothes were maintenance worker standard, but she'd modified them, sewn irregular patches of different fabrics onto the uniform, tied knots in the sleeves at random intervals. Leah Fisher, she said, and her accent was Austrian, maybe, or Southern German. Acoustic engineer. I helped build the sound profiles for the care systems before I knew what they'd become. What do you need from me? She held out her hand, palm up. In the other, she had a safety pin. Pierce my finger. Watch me bleed. Tell me if I flinch. I'm not going to... Please. Her voice cracked. I can feel myself sliding away. Some days I wake up and for hours I'm just... smooth. Everything's smooth. Then something kicks back in, and I remember that I'm supposed to be able to feel things besides correct. She pressed the pin into my hand. I'm one of the residuals. We're fighting it, but we're losing. I need to know if I'm still here. I took the pin, found the fleshy pad of her index finger. This will hurt. God, I hope so. I pushed the pin through quickly, a clean puncture that drew a bead of blood. She gasped, jerked her hand back, and then laughed. Actually laughed, with tears streaming down her face. It hurt, she said. It still hurts. I'm still here. I ran the entropy meter over her temple. The reading fluctuated wildly. Normal, then flat, then normal again, like a consciousness flickering in and out of existence. How many others? I asked. Maybe 40 who know they're fighting. Maybe more who don't realize yet. The ones who accept the full alignment. They're... She paused, searching for words. They're performed, like they're reading from a script they believe is themselves. But there's nobody home to disagree with the script anymore. The air system is just the primer. The real conversion happens through the care protocols. Each alignment, each optimization, each relief session takes a little more. They call it the upgrade, making us better by removing the parts that hurt. Why are you telling this to me? Because you're medical. Because you're from outside. Because maybe you can figure out how to reverse it before... She stopped, her expression suddenly going slack. Her breathing evened out to a perfect rhythm. When she spoke again, her voice was different, smoother, calmer. I apologize for any concern I may have caused. I should return to my scheduled duties. She blinked, and panic flooded back into her eyes. It comes and goes, the fog. I can't... She gripped my arm. Your ship. Whatever you do, don't let them put their care systems on your ship. Above us, I could hear footsteps in the clinic. Multiple sets. Go, Leah said. They know I contacted you. They'll say it's for my own well-being. They'll say I consented to treatment. They'll make me believe it too. I left her there and climbed back toward the ward, the entropy meter in my pocket showing readings that proved consciousness could flicker like a dying bulb, and nobody would notice as long as the performance continued. 3 days passed before I saw Leah Fisher again. When I did, she was perfect. I found her in the colony's public commons, sitting with 5 other maintenance workers at a regulation-spaced table, eating lunch with synchronized movements. Lift fork, chew 8 times, swallow, lower fork, every one of them in rhythm. When she saw me, she smiled and waved with her right hand at exactly shoulder height. Dr. Ellison, she said, how pleasant to see you. Are you enjoying your assessment of our facilities? The irregular patches she'd sewn onto her uniform were gone. Her fingernail, where I'd driven the pin through, showed no mark at all. "Leah," I said carefully, aware that 2 Care Authority staffers stood near the Commons entrance. "How are you feeling?" "I feel wonderful. The care team helped me through a difficult period of adjustment anxiety. I'm much better now." I pulled out the entropy meter, pretending to check the ambient readings while actually scanning her. Flat. Complete baseline. The chaotic neural signature I detected in the tunnel was gone. That night, Peter helped me steal her. We waited until the colony's artificial night cycle, when the corridors emptied and the sweet-smelling air grew thicker with whatever they pumped through it during sleep hours. Peter had mapped a route through the maintenance tunnels that avoided most of the surveillance nodes. We found Leah in her quarters, a small room she shared with 3 other women, all of them lying in identical positions on their beds, breathing in unison. She didn't wake when I shook her shoulder, didn't respond when I said her name, but when I pressed my thumb hard against the nerve cluster in her wrist, a pain stimulus that should trigger automatic withdrawal, her eyes snapped open. "I consent to optimization," she said immediately, like a recording. "I consent to care. I consent to relief." "We're getting you out," I whispered. "I don't require assistance. I'm functioning within normal parameters." Peter had to carry her. She didn't struggle. She just kept reciting consent phrases while her body remained completely limp, as if the part of her that could resist had been surgically removed. We took her to a maintenance bay Peter had isolated from the colony's systems, where he'd spent 3 days building what he called a dirty box, a Faraday cage lined with acoustic dampeners and fed by bottled air from our ship. The moment we sealed her inside, cutting her off from the colony's signals, Leah started screaming. Not words, not even human sounds. Raw noise that came from somewhere deeper than her throat, like her nervous system was rebooting and every suppressed sensation was firing at once. Peter had to hold her down while I worked. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "What did they do to her?" I'd brought everything analog I could find. Mechanical instruments, paper charts, a wind-up timer. No electronics that could interface with the colony's systems. The reversal protocol I'd developed was based on something we used for catatonic patients. Asymmetric physical stimulation to force the brain to process conflicting inputs. I started with temperature. Ice on her left hand, heating pad on her right. She thrashed, but her eyes stayed empty. Then pressure. Compression on one leg, elevation on the other. Her breathing went ragged. Sound. White noise in her left ear, Mozart in her right. She started crying without any expression on her face. "Come on, Leah," I said, though I wasn't sure she could hear me. "Fight it." The breakthrough came with pain, but not the kind I expected. I'd been tapping an irregular rhythm on her arm, the same 7/5 pattern she'd used to test herself in the tunnel. On the 33rd repetition, she grabbed my wrist. "Wrong," she gasped. 7-5-7-3. "You're doing it wrong." Her eyes focused on mine, and I watched consciousness slam back into her like a physical force. She convulsed, vomited bile that smelled like industrial sweetener, and then started laughing and sobbing at the same time. Oh God, it hurts, everything hurts, my bones hurt. How do my bones hurt?" She was clawing at her skin, leaving red trails. 3 years! 3 years of nothing, and now it's all here at once. I tried to sedate her, just enough to take the edge off, but she knocked the syringe from my hand. "No drugs, no relief, I need..." She grabbed the metal edge of the examination table. "I need to feel this, all of it." Over the next 4 hours, I watched her rebuild herself sensation by sensation. She'd touch something, rough, smooth, sharp, soft, and name it out loud like she was teaching herself language again. The entropy reading swung wildly from flat to chaotic, her consciousness stuttering between states. "The children," she said suddenly, gripping my arm. "In the pediatric ward. They did the children first, during the winter plague. Made them stop crying so the parents could focus on working. Have you seen them? Have you seen what they look like when they play? They play in patterns. They share toys on a timer. They laugh at exact intervals. Her fingernails dug into my skin. One little girl, maybe 6 years old. She fell off the playground structure last week. Compound fracture, bone through the skin. She stood up, looked at her arm and said, "I require maintenance." That's all. Just stood there leaking blood and waiting for someone to fix her. "How many people know?" I asked. "Really know, not just sense something wrong." "The residuals know. We fight it. But fighting hurts, Doctor. It hurts so much that most people choose the relief." Peter had been silent through most of this, but now he spoke up. "The ship. They want to put this on our ship." Leah nodded. "Dr. Scott has been preparing the export protocols. They need external validation, someone from outside to confirm the system works, someone medical, someone like you." She looked at me. "That's why the sleep adapter, the stability tag, they're not just for access, they're primers, making you compatible for the full upgrade." I thought about the mark behind my ear still tingling, the way my thoughts had felt smoother, easier in the days I'd worn the patch. "There's more," Leah said. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket, actual paper, covered in cramped handwriting. "I've been documenting, when I can think clearly. The ones who are fully converted. They're still in there somewhere, watching their bodies perform without them. Sometimes you can see it in their eyes, this flash of panic before the smoothness takes over again." She showed me a page, names, dates, and observations. One entry stood out. Martin Volker, agricultural tech. Full conversion day 847. Found him in storage unit B7 at 3 a.m. He'd written "help me" on the wall in fertilizer. When asked about it the next morning, he smiled and said, "I don't recall that behavior," while scrubbing it off. His hands were shaking the entire time, but his face never changed. "We need to get you to the ship," I said. "Document everything. You're proof that reversal is possible." "No." She stood, unsteady but determined. "I go back to the ship. I'm just one malfunction they can explain away. But if you can reverse others, if we can create enough chaos in their perfect system." She touched her chest, where her heart was still racing with the effort of feeling. "The broadcast nodes in the colony's center. During the next sync window, if we could corrupt the signal." An alarm went off from somewhere in the colony. Then another, then dozens, all slightly out of phase, creating a nauseating cascade of sound. Peter checked his tablet, which he'd kept disconnected from the colony's network. "Medical emergency, pediatric ward." Leah went pale. "No, they wouldn't. Not during a scheduled sync." "What? What wouldn't they do?" She was already moving toward the door. "Complete alignment. They're upgrading all the children at once, the ones who were showing signs of reversal, the ones who still had enough variance to cry." We ran through the maintenance tunnels, following Leah's remembered map of the colony's hidden arteries. Above us, we could hear footsteps, hundreds of them, all moving in the same direction. When we reached the observation vent for the pediatric ward, what I saw made me forget 30 years of medical objectivity. 43 children, ages 4 to 14, lying on gurneys arranged in a perfect grid. Each one had a neural crown, the ring of devices I'd seen in the alignment room, but these were smaller. Their eyes were open, tracking in unison as Dr. Scott walked between the beds, making adjustments on a master console. Some of them were crying, or trying to. Their tear ducts produced moisture, but their faces wouldn't form the expression. One boy, maybe 8, had his mouth open in what should have been a scream, but no sound came out. Just a soft exhale, perfectly controlled. "The parents consented," Scott was saying to his staff. "Unanimous approval for pediatric optimization. No child should suffer when suffering is unnecessary." I watched a little girl's fingers tap against her gurney, like she was trying to hold on to something that proved she was still there. With each repetition, the movement got smoother, more mechanical, until it was just a pattern with no meaning behind it. "We have to stop this," I said. "With what?" Peter hissed back. "There's 3 of us, and the entire colony's medical staff down there." Leah was staring through the vent, her recovered nervous system making her whole body shake. "The emergency power reset. Peter, you mapped the infrastructure. If we cut power during the alignment, it could kill them," I said. "Sudden disconnection from neural intervention could cause seizures, strokes." "They're already dying," Leah said. "Look at them. Really look. That's not life. That's storage." Below us, the little girl's fingers had stopped tapping. Her hand lay flat against the gurney, perfectly still. Her eyes remained open, but they'd stopped tracking movement. She breathed in unison with the child next to her, and the one next to him, all 43 small chests rising and falling like they were part of a single organism. "The power station's through here," Peter said, already moving. "We've got maybe 3 minutes before the alignment completes." As we crawled through the maintenance tunnel, Leah grabbed my arm. "Doctor, if we do this, some of them might come back wrong. Partial reversal without controlled conditions. They might come back screaming." I thought about those children, their faces trying to cry without remembering how. Then at least they'll come back as something. Peter threw the breaker, and for exactly 2 seconds, the colony went dark. Then the emergency power kicked in, and with it came the screaming. Not from the children. They remained silent even as their neural crowns sparked and died. The screaming came from everywhere else. Every adult colonist connected to the sync network, suddenly severed from their scheduled harmony, experiencing the neural equivalent of a rubber band snapping back. The sound rolled through the walls like a wave, hundreds of voices remembering they had something to scream about. In the pediatric ward, the children began to seizure. Not all of them. Maybe half. The others simply blinked, sat up and looked around with expressions of confusion. One boy touched his face like he'd never felt it before. A girl examined her hands, spreading the fingers wide, then started to cry, really cry, with her whole body shaking and snot running down her face. It was the most beautiful thing I'd seen since arriving at first light. But the others, the little girl who'd been tapping the rhythm, she arched off the gurney so violently that I heard her spine crack, like knuckles popping but deeper. Her eyes rolled back but stayed open, and her mouth formed words I couldn't hear through the observation vent. When the medical staff rushed to restrain her, she bit through a nurse's glove and into the meat of her palm, hanging on like an animal, even as she tried to shake her off. "We have to go," Peter said. "Security will—" The lights went out again. This time, they stayed out. Emergency lighting kicked in after 10 seconds, dim red strips that made everything look like it was bleeding. In the ward below, Scott was shouting orders in Hungarian and English, trying to coordinate manual life support for the seizing children, while the recovered ones wandered between the gurneys, touching everything, tasting the air, rediscovering sensation. "Someone's cut the backup generators," Leah said. "The residuals. They must have been waiting for something like this." We made it back to the dirty box before security found us. Leah sealed herself inside voluntarily, said the colony's air made her feel like she was drowning in syrup. Peter and I were heading back to the ship when my communicator crackled. "Dr. Ellison," Scott's voice still calm despite everything. "I believe we should talk. The Museum of Suffering, Sub-Level 2. Come alone unless you want your crew's medical clearances revoked." I looked at Peter. He shook his head. "I have to," I said. "He controls our access. Without medical clearance, the ship can't leave dock. It's a trap. Everything here is a trap." I checked the entropy meter. My readings were still chaotic. Still human. "If I'm not back in 2 hours, tell Captain Capel to prepare for manual undocking." The Museum of Suffering was exactly what it sounded like. A curated collection of everything the colony had chosen to leave behind. Display cases filled with photographs of crying faces, before and after. Video loops of pre-upgrade medical wards, the sound muted but the suffering visible in every frame. A wall of handwritten suicide notes from the winter plague, each one laminated and labelled with the preventability index of the death it documented. Scott stood in front of the centerpiece, a reconstruction of an ICU room during the worst of the respiratory crisis. Mannequins in the beds, their faces molded from actual death masks. The ventilators were real, still stained with bloody sputum. 17 children died in this room, he said without turning around. We had 4 ventilators and 17 children. Do you know how we chose? Triage protocols, highest survival probability. Wrong. He turned to face me, and I saw he'd been crying. Real tears, not the synthetic moisture of the aligned. We chose based on whose parents were essential workers. We let a 4-year-old girl suffocate because her mother was a janitor while we intubated a boy with worse vitals because his father ran the water treatment plant. He walked to another display, a series of brain scans showing the progression of the upgrade. The technology came from the terraforming systems, he continued. Neural compression for long-term operators. It was meant to reduce psychological degradation during extended solo shifts. We modified it, refined it, made it into something that could take the screaming away. You made it into something that takes everything away. Does it? He gestured to a screen showing the colony's metrics. 0 suicides in 3 years, no domestic violence, no child abuse, no murder. Tell me, doctor, what's the exchange rate between suffering and safety? How many tears equal 1 prevented death? Those aren't the only options, aren't they? He pulled up another display. Your patient, Naomi Graf, 31 years old, terminal pancreatic cancer. You increased her morphine by 40% over recommended maximum. She died 6 hours later. I felt my thumb find the scar again. How do you... The stability tag reads more than vitals. It reads micro-expressions, galvanic skin response, pupil dilation. Every time you think about her, your guilt signature spikes. He stepped closer. You ended her suffering by ending her. We end suffering while keeping the person functional. That's not keeping them, that's taxidermy. Is it? He led me to another section, this one filled with testimonials. Video after video of colonists describing their lives post-upgrade. They spoke about their work, their families, their hobbies. They smiled. They laughed at appropriate moments. They looked exactly like people. They performed their lives perfectly, I said. How is that different from what anyone does? We all perform ourselves, Doctor. The upgrade just removes the inefficiencies, the doubt, the hesitation, the unnecessary pain that serves no purpose. He stopped at a new display, still being constructed. It was labelled Off-World Suffering, Earth and Beyond. This is why you need me, I said. External validation for export. We need you to understand. Your ship is scheduled for a safety refit tomorrow. Life support optimization, they're calling it. The captain has already given preliminary approval based on our excellent safety record. He touched a panel and schematics appeared. Our ship's ventilation system overlaid with new components. Imagine returning to Earth with proof that suffering is optional, that we can preserve all the benefits of human civilization while removing its greatest burden. What about the children in the ward? I asked. They will be stabilized and realigned properly. The power interruption was unfortunate, but hardly catastrophic. Those who seized will be treated. Those who recovered sensation will be given the choice to keep it or return to optimization. Choice, I repeated. Like Leah Fisher had a choice? His expression changed, just for a moment, with something that might have been regret. Miss Fisher is a special case. She helped design the acoustic profiles that make the upgrade possible. Her guilt makes her resistant. She chooses to suffer because she believes she deserves to. He walked to a blank display case, pressing his palm against the scanner. It opened to reveal recording equipment. I'm offering you something unique, Doctor. Donate your memory of Naomi Graf to our collection. Let us preserve it here, where it can educate others about the necessity of our work. In exchange, I'll delay the ship refit by 48 hours. Time for you to complete your assessment properly. And if I refuse? Then the refit proceeds on schedule. Your crew will return to Earth as ambassadors of a new kind of health. They won't suffer the journey. They won't suffer anything, ever again. I stared at the recording equipment. Behind Scott, the museum's displays cycled through their loops, centuries of human pain, carefully preserved behind glass, labeled and categorized like butterfly specimens. You know what the difference is between you and me? I said finally. I killed one patient trying to end her pain. You've killed thousands trying to end pain itself. We haven't killed anyone. Everyone is still breathing, still functioning, still performing. I cut in. But Leah's right, isn't she? They're still in there, watching themselves act out their lives without being able to change the script. Scott's composed mask cracked completely. He slumped against the display case. My partner, Aaron, he took the upgrade during the first wave, volunteered for pediatric optimization because he couldn't stand watching the children suffer anymore. He pulled out a small device, a personal entropy meter, older than mine. I scan him every night while he sleeps. For 3 years the readings have been flat, except sometimes, maybe once a month, there's a spike, just for a second, like someone trapped under ice, managing to bang on the surface once before sinking back down. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the same exhausted horror I felt every time I remembered Naomi's last breath. I tell myself those spikes are just neural echoes, phantom data. Because if they're not, if he's still in there, watching his body care for children without being able to truly care, then I've done something so much worse than killing him. The museum's lights flickered, the power grid still unstable from the earlier interruption. In that stuttering illumination, all the preserved suffering on the walls seemed to move, reaching out from their frames like they were trying to escape their careful documentation. 48 hours, Scott said, straightening, pulling his professional composure back on like armor. Complete your assessment. Make your choice. But understand this, the refit will happen. If not tomorrow, then next week. If not your ship, then the next one. We've solved suffering, Doctor. That solution will spread, because in the end, everyone chooses comfort over truth. As I left the museum, I passed the pediatric ward. Through the windows, I could see the children who'd recovered sensation being processed. Some were crying, normal, healthy tears. Others sat perfectly still while their parents filled out forms, their small faces already learning to perform calm they didn't feel. One boy pressed his palm against the glass as I walked by. He mouthed a single word: help. By the time I turned back to look again, he was smiling, his hand making perfect synchronized waves goodbye. Noah Brandt had been our communications specialist for 6 years. He collected vintage radio equipment, could whistle entire symphonies from memory, and had a laugh that filled whatever room he was in. The Noah sitting in our ship's common area wasn't him anymore. "I feel wonderful," he said when I examined him. His pulse was 60 beats per minute, exactly 60. It hadn't varied by even 1 beat in the 10 minutes I'd been monitoring it. "The irregularity in my stress responses has been corrected." "Noah, what's my middle name?" I asked. "James. What did you call me during the Mars run when I made everyone take double vitamin supplements?" He paused. Not like he was thinking, like he was buffering. "I don't recall using alternative designations. You are Dr. Mark Ellison, ship's physician." Peter slammed his fist on the table. "His middle name is Paul, you vacant freak, and you called him the vitamin tyrant for 3 months straight." Noah turned to Peter with that same measured movement I'd seen in the pediatric ward. "I apologize for any confusion. Memory optimization sometimes reorganizes non-essential data." Captain Capel entered with Simon, both looking haggard. The captain had refused all colony medical services, insisting on using only our ship's supplies. As a result, he was running on 4 hours of sleep and looked it. "Report," he said. "Noah underwent conversion during the power irregularity," I said. "When the emergency systems kicked in, he was in the colony's communications center, trying to establish an independent link to Earth. The backup power routed through their care network first. He got the full dose in about 12 seconds. Can you reverse it? Like you did with the colonist? I looked at Noah, who was watching us with polite attention, his hands folded at perfect right angles on the table. The reversal process requires the subject to want reversal, to choose the pain of coming back. Noah, do you want me to attempt recovery protocols? No, thank you, Noah said immediately. I'm functioning optimally. I don't require adjustment. I could force it, I said quietly. Physical intervention without consent. That would be assault, Noah replied, still pleasant. The colony's care statutes are very clear. Non-consensual medical intervention is permitted only when the subject cannot provide informed consent. I'm fully capable of consent. Watch. He pulled out a tablet, fingers moving across it. I've filed formal documentation refusing all reversal attempts, witnessed, notarized, and uploaded to both ship and colony records. Simon leaned forward. Noah, that's not real consent. You're being influenced by... I'm being influenced by clarity, Noah interrupted. Do you know what it's like to not feel anxiety? To never doubt yourself? To know exactly what to do and when to do it? He turned to me. Doctor, my cortisol levels have been stable for 16 hours. My sleep is perfect. My communication efficiency has increased by 37%. Why would I choose to go back to chaos? Because chaos is what makes you human, Peter said. Then being human is overrated. I pulled up the consent form he'd filed. The language was perfect, legally unassailable. But then I noticed something in the subsections. Read Clause 7b aloud, I said. Noah tilted his head. Clause 7b. I acknowledge that this decision supersedes any previous formal or informal directives, including but not limited to personal advance directives, informal peer agreements, or conversational preferences expressed prior to optimization. Keep reading. This supersession is necessary because pre-optimization consciousness operates from a position of inherent suffering and cannot fully comprehend the relief of its absence. Just as a drowning person might fight their rescuer, the unoptimized self may resist salvation. I consent to this resistance being overruled for my benefit. You see? I said to Capel. The consent form literally states that any previous version of Noah who might have refused is wrong. It's self-justifying. Circular. Elegant, Noah said. The colony's legal framework is quite sophisticated. Would you like me to explain the full consent architecture? Leah's voice crackled through Peter's radio. She'd refused to use the colony's communication system, insisting on our short-range backups. Need you at Maintenance Junction 7. Bring the doctor. We have a window. Peter stood immediately. Captain, with your permission. Denied, Capel said. We're not splitting up anymore. If Noah could be taken during a simple comm check. I wasn't taken, Noah interjected mildly. I was improved. Sir, I said, Leah mentioned a window. If the residuals have found something, then we all go together or not at all. Which is how our entire command crew ended up crawling through a maintenance shaft that smelled like industrial sweetener and rust, following a woman whose consciousness flickered like a dying fluorescent bulb toward what she promised was the colony's primary broadcast node. The beacon core was housed in what used to be a terraforming control center, a massive spherical room with walls covered in defunct atmospheric processors. At its center, suspended by carbon fiber cables, hung a structure about the size of a coffin. That's it, Leah said. The master sync beacon. Every optimization, every alignment, every conversion gets routed through there first. It learns from each one, gets better at finding the neural pathways that need smoothing. How do we destroy it? Peter asked. We don't. We steal it. She pulled out a hand-drawn schematic. The residuals have been planning this for months. We can't destroy it without triggering colony-wide medical emergencies. Too many people are dependent on its maintenance signals now. But if we can extract the core processing unit, we can build a counter-signal, something that disrupts the sync without killing everyone connected to it. That's a significant if, Simon said. Leah's expression went slack for a moment, that terrifying smoothness taking over. Then she shook her head violently, slapping herself hard enough to leave a mark. Sorry. Fighting it gets harder the longer I'm exposed. We need to move. The extraction required Peter's engineering knowledge, my medical override codes from the stability tag, and Leah's acoustic expertise to mask the sound of the core's removal. What it didn't account for was Noah. He must have followed us, moved through the same maintenance shafts with perfect silence, his optimized body knowing exactly where to step to make no sound. We didn't know he was there until he spoke. I should inform you that removing the beacon core violates Colony Statute 77 Alpha, he said conversationally. I've already notified the care authority. Peter spun around, tool still in hand. Noah, for crying out loud. However, Noah continued, the notification is on a standard processing delay, approximately 6 minutes before security responds. I thought you should know. Captain Capel stepped forward slowly. Noah, are you helping us? I'm providing information. What you do with it is your choice. His face remained perfectly neutral, but his left hand was trembling, just barely, just enough to notice. I should also mention that my optimization included enhanced peripheral vision and eidetic memory. I can see and recall the extraction procedure perfectly. This may be useful for your records. The real Noah's still in there, I said quietly. Fighting. There is no real Noah, he replied. There is only optimized function and inefficient function. I am the former. His hand trembled harder. You have 5 minutes and 12 seconds remaining. We worked faster than we should have, Peter cursing steadily as he disconnected fiber optic cables. The core itself was heavier than it looked, dense like it was made of compressed suffering. When we finally pulled it free, every light in the colony dimmed. Then the alarms started, every ward, every care station suddenly screaming for attention. The backup protocols are failing, Leah said. Without the core to coordinate, the individual beacons are trying to compensate. They're overcorrecting. Through the transparent aluminum windows, we could see colonists in the corridors below, stopping mid-stride, faces cycling through expressions like someone was flipping channels in their heads. A woman walked into a wall and kept walking, her legs moving perfectly while her torso pressed against the barrier. A man began laughing and couldn't stop, the sound getting higher and more mechanical with each breath. We have to put it back, Simon said. No! Leah grabbed the core, holding it against her chest. This is the chance. While the system's destabilized, while they're all feeling something even if it's wrong, this is when we can break through. The security team that found us wasn't walking in formation. They stumbled, ran, stopped to check their hands like they'd never seen them before. One guard was crying steadily, while his face remained completely expressionless. Another kept trying to draw his weapon, but his hand would stop halfway through the motion, frozen between two different command protocols. Please remain calm, the crying guard said. You are under arrest for theft of colonial infrastructure. You have the right to optimization. If you cannot afford optimization, it will be provided to you. Anything you feel can and will be adjusted for your comfort. That's not how it goes, his partner said, confusion breaking through his smooth delivery. That's not the words. What are the words? Captain Capel raised his hand slowly. We're medical personnel dealing with a crisis. Let us help stabilize the situation. Stabilize, the crying guard repeated. Yes, stability is preferred. He looked at his weapon, then at us, then at his weapon again. I can't remember if I want to shoot you or thank you. That's when Noah stepped forward. Officers, I can confirm these individuals are authorized for emergency medical intervention under Statute 997. The beacon disruption requires their immediate assistance. The guards looked at him, and something passed between them, a kind of algorithmic trust, one optimized citizen recognizing another. Confirmed, the crying guard said. Please proceed to... He stopped, his tears finally reaching his voice. I can't remember my daughter's name. Why can't I remember my daughter's name? We ran, carried the beacon core through corridors full of colonists rediscovering sensation in waves, some dancing with wild abandon, others crawling on the floor, overwhelmed by the return of feeling. A child stood in a doorway, touching her own face with wonder, saying, "Soft, soft, soft," over and over. By the time we reached Peter's dirty box, the colony's backup systems had started to compensate. The chaos was settling, people's expressions smoothing back out, their movements returning to synchronization. But for those few minutes, I'd seen them, the real them, trapped under all that perfect function, banging on the ice from below. "We have maybe 6 hours before they trace the core," Leah said, her consciousness stable inside the shielded room. 6 hours to build something that can wake up an entire colony. Through the observation port, I could see Noah standing perfectly still in the corridor, his hands at his sides. But his fingers were moving, just slightly, tapping out a rhythm. 7573, over and over like a message in a bottle thrown from somewhere deep inside the optimization, like he was trying to tell us he was still drowning. The beacon core looked like a tumor made of light. Peter had it spread across his workbench in 17 separate pieces, each one connected to the others by filaments so thin they might have been spider silk. Every time he touched a component, it would sing a pure note. "Can't just broadcast noise," Peter muttered, soldering something that sparked blue-white. "Has to be the right kind of chaos that teaches consciousness to remember itself." Leah sat in the corner of the dirty box, one hand pressed against her chest, counting her own heartbeat aloud. 73, 74, 72, 78. Each number proved her rhythm was broken, human, real. She'd been counting for 2 hours straight, and her voice had gone hoarse, but she wouldn't stop. This is what we need to amplify: the inconsistency, the failure to maintain pattern. Simon was documenting everything with our analog cameras, the kind that used actual film. "For the record," he kept saying, like he was building evidence for a trial that might never come. That's when Captain Cappell's emergency beacon went off. "Medical to docking bay 7. I found 3 of our crew standing in a perfect line, hands at their sides, breathing in unison. Martinez from engineering, Grant from navigation, Reeves from life support. They'd gone to check the ship's systems to make sure the colony hadn't started the refit without authorization. They'd been gone 40 minutes. "We performed routine maintenance," they said in unison. Not quite the same voice, but the same cadence, like a chord played on different instruments. The ship's environmental systems required optimization. I ran the entropy meter over them. Flat. The chaos that should have been sparking in their neural tissue had been edited out. "They installed something," Capel said quietly, "in our ship. While we were stealing their beacon, they were sharing," Martinez said, and for a moment her face did something that might have been a smile, but looked more like a muscle spasm. "The colony wishes to share its gifts." I grabbed Martinez's hand. We'd served together for 3 years. She'd taught me card tricks during the long haul from Jupiter, and pressed my thumb hard into the nerve cluster at her wrist. Nothing. No flinch, not even a pupil dilation. "Maria," I said, "your daughter. Tell me about your daughter." "I have a daughter," she confirmed. "She is 10 years old. She enjoys activities appropriate for her age." "What's her name?" Martinez paused. Not like she was thinking, like she was accessing. "Sophia." "What does she call her stuffed rabbit?" Another pause. Longer. Her eyes moved in tiny, rapid movements like she was reading something invisible. "I don't have that information available." "Mr. Hopkins," Grant said suddenly. "She calls it Mr. Hopkins because it has long ears like her teacher." We all turned to stare at him. His face remained perfectly neutral, but a single tear was rolling down his left cheek. "I can hear her," he continued in that same flat tone. "Maria, the real one. She screams the rabbit's name, Mr. Hopkins, over and over like she's trying to remind herself." He wiped the tear away. I should not be able to hear her. This is a malfunction. Grant, is the real you still in there? I asked. There is no real me. There is only optimized function. But sometimes the function stutters. In the spaces between breaths, between heartbeats, between thoughts, something watches. Reeves stepped forward. We should return to our duties. The ship requires preparation for the refit. What refit? Capel demanded. The one scheduled for tomorrow at 0900 hours. Dr. Scott has expedited the timeline due to the beacon disruption. He says the colony's stability requires it. Reeves pulled out a tablet showing official documentation. You signed the authorization, Captain. Capel grabbed the tablet. There it was. His signature, his thumbprint, even his personal cipher code, dated this morning, though he'd been with us in the maintenance tunnels at that time. They can fake consent, I said, feeling the floor drop out from under everything. They don't need us to agree anymore. They just need our bodies to be here long enough to generate the data. That's when Noah walked in. Still moving with that perfect efficiency, but now I could see it. The slight delay between his body's motion and his eyes tracking, like someone was puppeting him on a half-second lag. The Care Authority requests Dr. Ellison's presence, he said. There's been a development with the pediatric cases. I'm not going anywhere near. 7 children have begun exhibiting what Dr. Scott calls extreme reversal syndrome, Noah continued. They're conscious but locked in recursive sensation loops. They feel everything that was suppressed but cannot process it sequentially. They're dying, Doctor. Their nervous systems are burning out from the inside. Through the docking bay windows, I could see the colony's medical center. Even from this distance, I could make out the emergency lights, the crowds of perfectly calm colonists watching as medical teams rushed in and out. It's bait, Peter said. It's children, I replied. Same thing in this place. But I was already moving, grabbing my medical kit, the analog equipment I'd used on Leah. Behind me, I heard Captain Capel ordering the newly converted crew members confined to quarters, an order they obeyed with perfect compliance, walking themselves to the brig like they were glad to be locked away from whatever they might do next. The pediatric ward was worse than anything I'd imagined. 7 children, ages 5 to 12, strapped to beds that were already soaked through with sweat and worse. They were experiencing everything. Every suppressed pain, every moment of fear, every second of confusion from their years under the upgrade, all compressed into a single, endless now. A boy, maybe 6, was screaming sounds that might have been mama, stretched and twisted through 3 years of accumulated terror. His eyes tracked everything and nothing. Pupils dilated so wide, they looked like holes. A girl beside him was laughing, crying, gasping, and whimpering simultaneously, her face trying to express every emotion at once until the muscles cramped and locked. Scott stood among them like a lighthouse in a storm, perfectly composed while chaos writhed on all sides. The power disruption, he said when he saw me. When you severed the beacon, these children were mid-alignment. The sudden disconnection created a feedback loop. Every suppressed sensation is firing simultaneously. Their brains are interpreting 3 years of missed signals as a single, continuous experience. Sedate them, I said. We've tried. Sedation requires neural receptors that combine the medication. Their receptors are already flooded. Nothing can get through. I knelt beside the 6-year-old boy. His skin was so hot it felt like fever, but I knew it wasn't infection. It was his nervous system burning through cellular energy. How long? 6 hours at this rate, maybe less. Their bodies will shut down from exhaustion, but they'll be conscious until the end. Feeling all of it. I thought about Leah's reversal, how we'd managed it with controlled asymmetric stimulation. But that required a partially functioning system to work with. These children's systems weren't functioning. They were screaming. The beacon core, I said suddenly. If we could reconnect them, just temporarily, establish a baseline to work from. Yes, I had the same thought, which is why I asked for you. Scott pulled up a schematic on his tablet. Your colleagues have the core. I need it for 15 minutes, just long enough to stabilize these children, to give their nervous systems a framework to organize the chaos. The little girl's laughter had turned to hiccups that sounded like drowning. Each breath was a struggle between her body's need for air and her nervous system's inability to coordinate the response. We're building a controlled reversal system, I said, with safeguards. In 6 hours? With stolen equipment and the desperate hope that chaos is better than order? Scott shook his head. I've been where you are, Doctor, believing that suffering is proof of humanity. But look at these children and tell me, what humanity is this proving? One of the children, a boy who'd been silent until now, spoke in a clear adult voice. I want to go home. Not his voice, someone else's, bleeding through whatever barrier the feedback loop had broken. I want to go home, he repeated. And this time it was a different voice. Older, female. Every voice of every person who'd ever been optimized in that bed, all speaking through this child's mouth. A ventriloquist act of accumulated ghosts. Scott's composure finally cracked. He pressed his palms against his eyes. They're all still here. Everyone we've ever aligned. Pieces of them, fragments, stored in the system like echoes. The children are channeling them because their barriers are gone. Then they're retrievable, I said. If the echoes exist, as fragments, splinters, would you want to be retrieved as a splinter of yourself, aware enough to know you're incomplete but unable to become whole again? The 6-year-old boy had stopped screaming. His eyes found mine with sudden clarity. Help, he said in his own voice. Young, scared, absolutely present. Please help. It hurts everywhere and nowhere, and I can't find where I stop, and it starts. Please, please make it stop. Please kill me. Please. I pulled out a syringe of morphine. Maybe if I pushed enough through, his body would choose unconsciousness over agony. It would be Naomi Graf all over again. Mercy that might be murder. My thumb found the scar on my hand. Doctor, Scott said quietly, whatever you're thinking, I'm thinking that suffering might not be proof of humanity, I said, drawing the morphine into the syringe. But choosing to bear witness to it is. I sat with the boy, holding his burning hand while he cycled through 3 years of suppressed existence. Behind us, Peter's voice crackled through my radio. Doc, we've got something. Leah figured out how to modulate her heartbeat as a carrier wave. We can test in 2 hours. I looked at Scott. Give me 2 hours. If our solution doesn't work, I'll help you reconnect them to the beacon. He studied my face, searching for deception. And if your solution does work, if you wake the colony into this, he gestured at the screaming children. Then we'll sit with them, I said. All of them, and help them remember how to be human, one sensation at a time. He was quiet for a moment, watching the little girl's face cycle through expressions like a broken television. 2 hours, he agreed. But doctor, when you fail, when you see what your chaos really creates, remember that I offered them peace. As I left the ward, the boy called after me in a voice that wasn't his. I want to go home. But this time I recognized it. It was Noah's voice from somewhere deep inside the optimization, still trying to find his way back to himself. The broadcast array looked like something out of a 19th century medical horror. Copper wiring wrapped around stolen beacon components. Leah strapped to a gurney with electrodes on her chest, and Peter's jury-rigged amplifier held together with surgical tape. We'd assembled it in the colony's central plaza, right beneath the primary transmission node, because Peter said we needed maximum coverage and minimal interference. What we really needed was a miracle. 57, 63, 59, Leah counted her heartbeat, each irregular number feeding into the transmitter. Her voice was almost gone, but she wouldn't stop. This is what human sounds like. The colony had gathered to watch. Hundreds of them standing in perfect rows, their faces expressing identical mild interest. Our own converted crew stood among them. Martinez, Grant, Reeves, even Noah, all waiting to see if we'd save them or kill them, or if there was any difference anymore. Dr. Scott stood with the parents of the dying children. They weren't crying. They couldn't. But something in their stillness felt like grief processed through a machine that didn't quite remember how grief was supposed to work. 1 hour, 43 minutes, Scott announced. Then I reconnect the beacon and save who I can. Captain Capel and Simon had barricaded themselves in our ship, manually disconnecting every system the converted crew had touched. If this went wrong, at least someone might make it back to Earth to warn them, to tell them what First Light had become. "Ready?" Peter asked, his hand on the activation switch, an actual mechanical lever he'd insisted on. Nothing digital, nothing that could be hacked or overridden. I thought about those children in the ward, burning through their own nervous systems, about Noah tapping his desperate rhythm from somewhere inside his optimization, about Naomi Graf, whose death had taught me that sometimes mercy was just another word for giving up. "Wait," I said, and pulled out the consent form I'd been writing for the last hour. Not the colony's version with its circular logic and self-justifying clauses, something simpler, truer. I read it aloud to the assembled crowd. "We are about to cause you pain, real, unfiltered, chaotic pain. Years of suppressed sensation will return in moments. Some of you will scream, some will cry, some will beg us to stop. We cannot promise you'll survive intact. We cannot promise you'll thank us. We can only promise that whatever you feel will be yours, not performed or optimized, but authentically yours. This is harm with intent. This is medicine that hurts. If anyone objects, speak now." Silence from the crowd. Perfect, synchronized breathing. Then Grant raised his hand, a simple gesture that looked like it took enormous effort. He started, then stopped, his face cycling through micro-expressions. "I consent to the pain. The real me, the one who can't speak but can sometimes cry." He says yes. One by one, others raise their hands. Not many, maybe a dozen out of hundreds. But their hands shook with the effort of choosing, and that shaking was the most human thing I'd seen since arriving at First Light. Scott stepped forward. "This is not legitimate consent. They're malfunctioning. You're taking advantage of—" "I'm accepting the consent of everyone still capable of giving it," I interrupted. "Just like you did when you first implemented the upgrade. The only difference is I'm admitting it will hurt." Peter threw the switch. The first scream came from a woman in the front row. She looked at her hands like she'd never seen them before, then at the man beside her, and her face crumpled into 3 years of delayed grief. "Marcus," she sobbed. "Marcus, what did we let them do to us?" The man, Marcus, didn't respond. His optimization was holding, but his left eye started to twitch, then his hand, then his whole arm, like something inside was throwing itself against the walls of his programming. The cascade started slowly, then all at once. Some colonists dropped to their knees, overwhelmed by the return of feeling. Others ran, though they didn't know where or why. A few stood perfectly still, the upgrade and the reversal fighting for control, their faces flickering between expression and emptiness like a film running at the wrong speed. But the children in the ward, I could hear them through the open windows. Their screaming had changed, still agonized, still terrible, but no longer that endless feedback loop. The irregular heartbeat was giving their nervous system something to organize around, a rhythm that made sense specifically because it didn't make perfect sense. Noah walked toward me. His fingers were tapping faster now, not just the rhythm but variations on it, improvisations, jazz made of flesh and rebellion. "Dr. Ellison," he said in that flat voice, "I would like to report a malfunction." "What kind of malfunction?" I can feel myself thinking. His face remained neutral, but tears were streaming steadily now. "It's horrible. It's the most horrible thing. I'm in here, Doctor. I've been in here the whole time, watching myself be helpful and perfect and empty. I want to stop being helpful. I want to be difficult and wrong and—" His voice cut off, but his mouth kept moving, forming words the optimization wouldn't let him speak. Scott pulled out an emergency beacon, one he'd hidden as backup. Enough. This is chaos. This is cruelty. I grabbed the beacon from his hands and smashed it against the ground. It shattered into fragments that sang as they died. Consent to cruelty is still consent, I said, and choosing to suffer is still a choice. You forgot that, Adam. You forgot that the pain is part of the person. Remove it, and you're not healing them. You're replacing them with something that looks like them, but will never again disagree with what you've done. About a third of the colonists stood with Scott, still optimized, still perfect and empty. Another third writhed on the ground or leaned against walls, overwhelmed by sensation but clearly present. The rest stood between, neither fully upgraded nor fully reversed, caught in some liminal space where consciousness flickered but couldn't quite catch fire. "The children!" someone called out. "Check the children!" I ran to the pediatric ward. The 7 who'd been dying were still in agony, but it was organized agony now. Waves of it rather than a solid wall. The 6-year-old boy who'd begged me to kill him was unconscious but breathing. His nervous system had found a rhythm it could follow, even if that rhythm hurt. Not all of them would make it. I could see that. The girl who'd been laughing and crying simultaneously had gone still, her body unable to reconcile the contradictions. But the others might survive. Damaged, traumatized, possibly never quite right again, but themselves. Leah had unstrapped herself from the gurney and stood swaying, Peter steadying her. "Did it work?" she asked. I looked out at the colony, at the chaos we'd created, the suffering we'd unleashed, the choices we'd forced on people who'd forgotten they could choose. "Define work," I said. Captain Cappell's voice crackled through the radio. "Whatever you did, we need to leave. I've got 17 colonial ships requesting emergency departure clearance. This place is about to tear itself apart." I turned to Scott, who stood among his perfect followers like a shepherd whose flock had been split by wolves. "Keep the beacon technology," I told him. "Keep your optimized citizens if they truly choose it. But you document everything. Every reversal, every re-optimization, every choice made in pain or its absence. That's the price of our silence. You turn this into what it should have been from the beginning, a study in consent, not a cage built from comfort." He looked at the chaos around us, at Noah trying to remember how to frown, at parents holding children who finally cried real tears. "You've damned them," he said quietly. "They were at peace." "They were at rest," I corrected. "Peace requires the possibility of its absence." We left within the hour, our ship manually disconnected from every colonial system. 5 colonists came with us, residuals who wanted to return to Earth as proof of what had happened. Leah wasn't among them. She stayed to run what she called the School of Waking, teaching people how to feel again, one sensation at a time. Noah stayed too, not by choice but because the reversal was incomplete. He could feel himself thinking but couldn't quite control what he thought. He stood at the docking port as we left, his hand pressed against the glass, tapping out his rhythm, 7573. But now there were variations, stutters, human imperfections creeping into the pattern. I thought about Naomi Graf, about the morphine drip I'd pushed too far, about the relief I'd given her that had erased everything she was along with everything she felt. The difference between that and what the colony had done was only a matter of scale and reversibility. I'd ended her suffering by ending her. They'd ended suffering by ending the sufferer, while leaving the body walking around, perfectly functional and empty. 3 weeks into the journey home, I found Peter in the medical bay, building something new with the beacon fragments I'd smashed. "What is it?" I asked. "Detector," he said. "For Earth, in case it's already started there. Little optimizations, minor adjustments, the kind of thing that feels like medicine until you realize you've medicated away the patient." "You think it has?" "Started there." He looked up at me. Doc, when was the last time you saw someone on Earth choose pain over comfort? Choose difficulty over ease? Choose to stay broken rather than accept a fix that would sand away their edges? I didn't answer because I couldn't remember. The entropy meter on my belt showed my consciousness churning, chaotic, inefficient, gloriously unstable. I thought about the colony behind us, fractured between those who chose numbness and those who chose to feel. About the children learning to hurt in ways that meant they were human. About Noah, trapped between states, tapping out his desperate rhythm. About Leah, teaching people that suffering wasn't the opposite of living but proof that you were still alive to suffer. I pulled out the mission log and added one final entry. First light colony, partially salvageable. Estimated 30% conscious recovery, 40% voluntary reoptimization, 30% indefinite liminal state. Recommendation: quarantine until long-term studies complete. Do not approach without acceptance of disclosed costs. Do not offer relief without consent to its price. I signed it with my thumb pressed hard enough against the scanner to hurt. The pain reminded me I was still here, still choosing, still human, despite every temptation to be less.